I was trying to explain today to someone on the internet what enlightenment actually is, and it's pretty hard to get the message across, because everybody that listens with a set of reference points that cannot possibly include what enlightenment is. The ego-based reality is nothing like the enlightened state, or enlightenment, better way of putting it. People tend to think that they become enlightened, and that's not a possibility. The thing that thinks it's you, the identity that thinks it's you, cannot become enlightened. That's not possible, because it's a dream. Without imagination, it doesn't actually exist. There is something that is aware of the mind. Before the mind even begins, it is there. It is pure awareness. And when this that's aware of the mind becomes aware of itself, this is a satori, a glimpse of truth, a glimpse of reality, rather than a dream that thinks it's a someone. Now, if the satori lasts, if it stays, if awareness stays aware of itself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that is enlightenment. It has nothing to do with the mind. It has nothing to do with the ego. And so all a human being can do to find enlightenment is to prepare their mind for it. That's all they can do. There's nothing else they can do. You can't make yourself enlightened, because yourself is what actually disappears. You don't get enlightened and you're still there as somebody that thinks they're real. That's not how it works. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about what enlightenment is. Trying to explain that to somebody over the internet is very difficult. Why would you want to become enlightened if it means you're not going to become enlightened? You're not real. You take away your imagination and you disappear. Your identity as an I is made up of memory and projections, reference points, none being real. Who you are is here. It is always here, but it's not an I. It's not personal. It is pure awareness. It is always here. It has always been here, and it cannot go anywhere else. So the idea of looking for enlightenment somewhere else is ridiculous. That's not a possibility either. It's the strangest thing trying to teach people about enlightenment. The mind can be prepared for it, but it can't actually in any way make it happen. For me, I was quite fortunate in that I ran into enlightened people in my late 20s in America. And I, at that stage, didn't understand enlightenment. I thought it was something to do with becoming wise, collection of knowledge, collection of understanding of how everything worked. And this is one of the definitions of enlightenment for those who are not involved in spirituality, an enlightened age. an age of understanding. And that was my understanding also. And it wasn't until I actually was able to engage with an enlightened man that I discovered it had absolutely nothing to do with the mind. Because as I sat and talked to him, I noticed my mind disappeared. I noticed my mind evaporated. I noticed that there was no longer a sense of an I or a somebody. There was just, I'm here. There wasn't a sense of of the thoughts. They were gone. And I realized that enlightenment was something very different to what I had understood it to be. And it really frightened me. I remember after talking to this man feeling really good that it was over, because I'd lost control. I mean, I was still sitting there talking, but I had no longer had control because my mind was not operating. It was flatlined. And it's scary to be out of control because we feel we need to maintain control to survive. And so when we move into the unknown, out of control, fear arises to protect us from the unknown. But what I did realize is that there was something there. This guy was not what I thought. He was not just a wise man who had a lot of understandings. There was an energy phenomenon about him that normal human beings did not carry. And this is called the Buddha field, a field of energy that has the ability to quieten the mind, has the ability to bring a sense of peace and calm, and is quite beautiful to be around. There's a certain sweetness in it. And I hadn't recognized at that stage the price that this man in front of me had paid for enlightenment. I didn't realize how difficult it could be. I listened to all the discourses, and I studied old masters, both Taoist and Buddhist and Hindu and Sufi, and boiled it all down and recognized that if you study any of them long enough, you'll find they all say the same thing, and that what is required of the mind is unconditional surrender. And that is the gateway. Well, having no understanding at all of unconditional surrender, that was quite a task to take on, because the first thing that you ask yourself is, well, how do I surrender? And then someone who knows a little bit more than you says, well, surrender is not a doing, it's a non-doing. You can't do surrender. Well, that throws you into a little bit of a panic. If I can't do surrender, and all the old masters are saying that unconditional surrender is the doorway, including Gautama the Buddha, and it's something that I can't do, how to go about that? What has to happen? And so in studying my mind, I discovered it was just really a survival mechanism, and that surrender wasn't part of its programming, because surrender is against survival. Unconditional surrender is a death. Of course, conditional surrender can help you survive, but they're talking about unconditional surrender, not conditional surrender. It's a death of the I. It's a death. It's a full stop. It's an end. And so how is that facilitated? if I'm really going to go for enlightenment, if I'm really going to go for that level of higher consciousness, how do I facilitate unconditional surrender of the mind? And so I started looking at the different things that would bring the mind to a stop. Meditation being the first. Watching the breath, when the mind appears, abandoning it and coming back to the breath. Being mindful of my environment, being mindful of my body. When awareness was on my mind, I'd bring it back to what is real, because the mind and what it thinks is not real. It's all dream. And so I started teaching the mind to let go of itself, to let go of its story. And that was difficult at first, but after a while it became easier. Being able to let things go. And then I got an understanding that acceptance is another way that you can learn surrender, accepting things instead of resisting life. And so the practice of acceptance came into play. And then I became very aware of the different movements inside of my own body when I wasn't in acceptance or when I was in resistance to life. When I was in argument with someone or disagreement of some kind, I noticed that my body would be closed inside. There'd be a closure. That matched the closure of my mind to defend itself against whatever was going on in front of me. And so I recognized that in practicing openness, the mind was less likely to contract, less likely to resist. And in true openness, there is no movement. There is just openness. And when I really examined it thoroughly, I found openness and surrender were very similar. Openness being a non-doing, and surrender, unconditional surrender, being a non-doing. Closure is a doing. It takes energy to close. It takes energy to maintain closure, because closure is resistance. It actually takes no energy whatsoever to be open. When you were little, as a baby, you were naturally wide open. It took no energy for you to be wide open. But over the years, we developed defense systems against feeling. We learnt to resist the world, we learnt to close, and we learnt to maintain those closures, even though they take energy. And so by the time we left school, we were probably pretty closed, energetically. And so I decided that I wanted to practice openness. Anytime any contraction was noticed inside myself, anytime any form of resistance was noticed inside myself, there was a letting go. Back to openness, back to what I called zero. Zero being open. Anything above zero being some form of closure. Of course, if we look at massive closure, we start talking about anger and fear. They tend to close us more than anything else. And in practicing openness diligently, I found that things that used to close me didn't any longer. But I also discovered that certain things supported closure, supported resistance to life, resistance to human beings, resistance to situations. And they were belief systems that I had. Beliefs in right, wrong, good, bad. And because I wanted to practice openness and I wanted to be open, I started to dismantle these belief systems so they wouldn't support resistance, wouldn't support closure. Anytime any resistance occurred inside of me, for any reason, I would examine the belief system that supported it. and find a way to undo it, because I didn't want to be closed. I was interested in higher consciousness. I was interested in enlightenment, and I recognized that resistance of the mind and contraction of the mind were not going to support higher consciousness or enlightenment. In Buddhism, they talk about developing a mind that is equanimous, basically a mind that stays even or flat. It's relatively easy to do when you're not in the marketplace. But when you're in the marketplace dealing with family, friends, employees or employers or whoever else upsets you, can you stay even-minded or non-resistant inside while you're being attacked, while you're being disturbed by others? The practice of openness and the practice of taking down belief systems that support closure support this mind that remains equanimous even when under attack. So, unconditional surrender being the doorway to enlightenment, which is a non-doing, a non-reacting, a non-resisting, a non-closure, can be developed in a human being through the practice of meditation, mindfulness, and openness, if there's an interest. If there's not an interest, if all a person wants to do is support the resistance and contraction inside their mind, well, that's how it's going to be for them. But if you're interested in higher consciousness, there needs to be an interest in developing a mind that will support higher consciousness, developing a mind that will support enlightenment. And only you can do that. Nobody can help you. Nobody can do it for you. Only you can do that. It's going to be your practice. And it does take practice. Just listening to what I'm saying and possibly agreeing with me isn't going to change the way your mind is. If it is programmed by default to resist life, to contract, it will continue to do that until you die. Unless you intervene in that, unless you teach it not to, through practice. And that's up to you. You can't learn your way to higher consciousness. You can't study your way to higher consciousness. You can become more knowledgeable about higher consciousness, but you won't have higher consciousness. The doorway is unconditional surrender, not knowledge.